I know there's an awful lot of evidence that he had other motives, Stig, besides the fact that he didn't want her to find out, that he really did know this was a campaign violation. That's what this painstaking evidence that's come in has shown. But I think that at the end of the day, he will be convicted of something. I'm not sure if it's going to be the felony, though.
So what did you make of Stormy Daniels, David? That's the key question, her arrival, what her evidence was like.
Well, I thought that it's compelling evidence. I do think that, if the jury really believed that they never had sex, that this was nothing but an extortionate attempt by a profiteer, a porn actress, to get money out of him, they would feel differently about the substantive charges and whether this should be bumped up to a felony. Having said that, it's not really legally relevant, and it's up to the judge to draw those lines. That's why he's the judge. And so I think that it was a bad day in front of the jury because she was allowed to get into these prurient details. She was also allowed to say that she had a threat 5 years after their alleged sexual escapade in a parking lot where a man came over, knew who she was, and said to her, "You have a beautiful baby with you. It'd be terrible if anything happened to your baby." That's obviously very prejudicial. The only possible relevance is if Trump had something to do with that assault being made on her in the parking lot. That should have been kept out. It wasn't kept out of the parking lot. The defense tried to make the best of that as they could by saying that, well, wait a second, you sold your story for $15,000 after your life was threatened? This just shows what a liar you are. If that event had really happened in the parking lot, you wouldn't have sold your story for $15,000. You would have kept your head down. And the other thing they impeached her on was that she has previously denied that they had sex. Now, of course, she says she had reasons to do that. The notoriety and fame of Trump, the undesirability of putting herself at the eyes of crosshairs, all that kind of stuff. So it's gone back and forth and back and forth. So it's not a good day for Trump today, but it could be actually a basis for an appeal on the fact that he was denied a mistrial. They'll say his lawyers didn't object enough, and they'll say the lawyers didn't object because they would have just highlighted the prejudice to the client. It would have made it look like they were, jumping boxes, saying, it's hurting me so bad. And it was already precluded by the judge that it shouldn't have come in. So I think the judge should have kept better control of his courtroom today. Not an easy trial to manage.
I think that's an understatement. It's not an easy trial to manage, David. So your point is that you think the details of the sex, the fact that she rolled up a magazine and spanked him, the fact that the nature of the position, that should have been ruled out and it wasn't. And the question is, will that be enough to appeal on if he is convicted?
It was, in fact, ruled out. I think that the judge should have been much more specific. He told the prosecution to go light on that, and the prosecution didn't go light. They went heavy. Now, as I was saying, they really want to win. I mean, he ran, the DA in New York City ran on the pledge that he would do something about Trump, and meaning criminally prosecute Trump. He won the primary based on that. He's got all these deputy district attorneys primed to, convict Trump in this case, just like Trump has spent millions of dollars in his prime to not be found guilty. It's very contentious. But having said that, they should stick to the rules, because to give Trump an appellate issue like Harvey Weinstein ended up having an appellate issue, that doesn't serve anybody. But in the interim, Stig, everybody wants, if they're on that side, a conviction before the election. And on Trump's side, wouldn't they love to have a hung jury or an acquittal before the election? I don't think that's going to happen.
And you've been a prosecutor, David. Do you think it works? Do you think that Trump sitting there, eyes closed, this porn star looking at him, identifying him, talking about the sex acts they did, do you think if you were prosecuting, would you go home, pour yourself a glass of wine and say that will have worked with the jury today?
I would have been tempted to get in as much harmful evidence against the former president as I could. But the fact that the judge set guardrails, I think they really were taking a risk. I think that, if the judge had granted a mistrial, it would be the biggest story in the world by a factor of 10. And to even take that risk, it's a pretty overwhelming case. And whether they can get to a felony, to bump it up to a felony, is going to depend a lot more on Michael Cohen. So I think just by, Michael Cohen is going to say, I told him very clearly that this was felony conduct because it was a violation of state and federal campaign finance laws. If Trump was just knowing he was filing false documents or putting false documents in the records, he wasn't exactly sure why, or it was going to avoid embarrassment. No, he has to specifically intend to violate campaign finance laws to be convicted of the felony. And if he's only convicted, Stig, of the misdemeanor, he's going to say all that money, all that time. Basically, they just gave me a couple of parking tickets here. Got a couple of traffic tickets here in New York.
And if they bump it up to a felony, that doesn't mean prison, though, does it?
No, no one thinks that he's really going to be sent to prison in this case. He's also going to argue in the court of public opinion, as he has, that the U.S. Attorney's Office, not just under Trump, not just under Bill Barr or Sessions, but under Merrick Garland and Biden, that U.S. Attorney's Office, with a timely case that hadn't been barred by the statute of limitations, decided not to go on this case. They went on John Edwards, right, for the same kind of campaign violation, misstating the records and what the money was really used for. They went against presidential candidate John Edwards, and yet the feds did not go on this case, leaving the state to go on it and having this high burden to bump it up to a felony. But all in all, if I were betting money, I still think that they're going to convict him of something.
What about, you know, juries in America very well? Is there a chance there'll be a couple of men on the jury who feel, well, maybe it's you're all right to cover up an affair, or a couple of Trump supporters? I mean, how many will it take to get him off? How many on the jury would need to hang this?
If he has just one out of the 12 jurors that hang, that person could prevent a finding of guilty. However, there'd be a retrial. But again, that would be considered a victory by Trump, and I think by public opinion, if he doesn't stand found guilty before the election. But I think that this jury is going to be very fair. You know, I'm originally from New York City, and I kind of get it. I think I would be a fair juror. I really do on the Trump case. I would look at it as I'm looking at it with my analysis with you and saying, well, here are the pluses and minuses, and I have to find anything I do find beyond a reasonable doubt. And, you know, I myself, you know, wouldn't have been that swayed by her describing it, because I think there's a lot of reasons to cast doubt on her story. She goes up to his room the first time she's ever met him. Why are you going to his room? You're going to have dinner. Go meet in the bar. Go meet in the dinner area downstairs. Don't go up to his room. And then he comes to the room in pajamas, and he says, you know, you can get out of being trailer trash. This is your big chance to get out of the trailer park. I mean, how insulting, how rude. It's sort of hard to imagine that they really did have consensual intercourse afterwards. And she's always said that that's what happened. She's always said that she was not coerced. She went kind of a little bit the other way today, Stig, and she said, well, I felt there was a power imbalance. Yeah. I felt like he was standing between me and the door. But I'm not saying that I felt either psychologically or in any other way coerced. So she's really kind of, you know, speaking out of both sides of her mouth. And I've always thought this, you know, I used to be on TV with Avenatti all the time, who was her lawyer, who ended up going to prison, who was, you know, pushing her story. She also owes Trump $300,000. Now it's grown to $600,000 with interest because she sued him for defamation. The judge not only threw her case out, and she says it was all Avenatti's fault. He went to prison. He was a no-goodnik. But the reality is that she agreed to pursue that lawsuit. She lost it, and she has to pay him $600,000. She said in court today, I'd rather go to jail than pay him a penny. I hate him. I despise him. I called him an orange, you know what, but that was after he called me something insulting. So, you know, the jury may think, you know, she gives as good as she gets. I don't even know if the story is true, but at the end of the day, I think this was just a misdemeanor. He didn't want his wife to find out about it. It turns out she was home with her infant at the time that this allegedly happened. He probably shouldn't have invited her up to the hotel room at all, his wife would think. And she wouldn't have wanted to hear about it. And so I know there's an awful lot of evidence that he had other motives, Stig, besides the fact that he didn't want her to find out, that he really did know this was a campaign violation. That's what this painstaking evidence that's come in has shown. But I think that at the end of the day, he will be convicted of something. I'm not sure if it's going to be the felony, though.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's how much he knew at that point. David, it's always great to talk to you. I always learn something about how the whole thing is working. Thank you for taking the time.
Great to be with you. Really a pleasure.